The Book of Revelation, Part 20. In our last study, we learned that the kings of the whole world had come together to make war against the Lamb, and in this chapter, we see the catastrophic results of their rebellion. Now, very briefly review what we just studied, so that we can see how the events of this chapter fit into the overall narrative of Revelation. We saw in the previous chapter that there are two main characters that will ultimately be defeated by the Lamb. First, there is the dragon, which represents Satan and his demons, and second, there is the harlot riding on top of a beast, which represents a global coalition of false religion and political power. Now, the dragon attacks the woman who represents God's people, but ultimately, the angel helps her and her offspring escape to the wilderness where they will be protected until the judgment of God falls upon the earth. Then the angel turns his attention to the whore riding on the beast. And in this chapter, he begins to execute God's judgment against her and her followers. So, what do we learn from this passage? Well, first of all, we learn that this judgment is both sudden and severe. In verse 1, it says that a great earthquake shook the earth. And in verse 6, it says that the merchants of the earth were filled with great and sudden fear. Now this shows us that no one can escape the judgment of God when it falls. Everything that this system has built will collapse in a moment, and no one will be able to stop it. Secondly, we see that this judgment is complete. It says that in 1 hour, all of Babylon's wealth, power, and influence will vanish. And this reminds me of Jesus' words in Matthew's Gospel when he said, "For this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." So we can be confident that this is the final judgment against all of Babylon's systems. Nothing will be left of them. Now, finally, we need to notice that this judgment is summarized in just one word, and that word is judgment. It says here in verse 2 that the judgment of God has come upon her, and that is summarized in the word Babylon. So whatever is happening to Babylon, whatever is happening to that system, it is nothing less than the judgment of God. And look, this passage is a warning for all of us who believe in Jesus Christ because it warns us that no earthly empire can stand against the judgment of God. And it also warns us that we must be discerning, that we must be able to discern between truth and error, between right and wrong, and not be carried away by the error of this wicked world. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this study. Until next time, Shalom.